If you're willing, I want to ask you to tell from the beginning Julia's story.
Very happy to, Ron. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be on as well. Very grateful for that.
A pleasure.
Um, so, our daughter Julia was born in 1990, and she was born healthy, as she liked to say. She was a 10 out of 10, which she
Mm.
was. And then we went on sabbatical to the Netherlands when she was 6 months old. And I was going to do research there for 6 months. And she caught a chickenpox virus, apparently, when she was there. And we usually just get a fever and a rash for a day or two,
Right.
usually, and it goes away. And unfortunately, the chickenpox virus attacked her heart, which happens very rarely, but does happen. And it destroyed her heart. And, she started losing weight. And we were in the hospital in the Netherlands, wondering why she was losing weight. The doctors were wondering. And finally, a cardiologist just happened to walk by and noticed that she seemed to need some sort of, heart issue, or had some type of heart issue. Uh, Pulled over, and everything is, of course, in Dutch, and we weren't understanding Dutch. So he pulls an echo machine, echocardiograph machine, and starts looking at her heart through an echo, and gets this concerned look on his face. Calls a resident, and they take us in, my wife and I, into a room, and the resident starts crying.
Mm.
And I knew something was going on. And the doctor just very matter-of-factly said, "Your daughter's going to die. And she has a heart that's completely destroyed. And she has about a month to live." And, just suddenly, you're thinking maybe she has some GI problem, with her stomach or an esophagus or something, she's losing weight, but it wasn't that. And I remember just kind of instantly just going, "Is there anything that can be done?" No. And you should really just go home tomorrow. Go back home to the US and let her die in peace at home.
Wow.
And I remember then through my tears, I said, "Isn't there anything that could be done, like a heart transplant or something?" And he said, "No, those don't work. And we don't do those on children anyway."
I want to ask you to go back to Julia's second heart transplant and its
Yeah, yeah.
success and its failure.
Yeah, yeah. It was a difficult time because she was 9 years old, and so she was in elementary school. She was on a softball team, and I was the coach of the
Mm.
softball team. She was the worst player by far. She got one hit the whole season, and when she did, I started crying. I just couldn't help it. "Oh my God, you're gonna, that's great!" And it was one of those little infield hits that everyone, created errors from. But it was fine. And as we were walking back from the game, she fainted. She passed out, and I knew something was wrong. So we, brought her in to Children's Hospital, to cardiology. She knew them very well. They're amazing people, and they put her right into moderate care. There's intensive care, moderate care, and regular care in hospitals. And so they put her in moderate, and they said, "Yeah, it looks like she may need a new heart, but it's not urgent." And there are a couple of other people in line, and that was fine with us. We were willing to do that. And but it did turn out that she really needed a new heart faster than that. And they did the whole workup perfectly. It's just you can't predict these things perfectly.
Mm.
And she started getting sicker, and they I think they elevated her on the list more, but certainly there are a lot of kids who are waiting
Yeah.
ahead of her. And then one night I was staying with her at the hospital, and there was a room that was available right next to her, which is nice. And they said, "Vic, you don't have to sit in a chair and sleep. You can use this bed if you want." I said, "Great." And so while I was there, it was during the US Open tennis tournament. And I'm a big tennis fan. And I was watching these two tennis players, Todd Martin playing another guy. And Todd Martin, I think it was the finals, as I recall, and he was losing 2-0. And he was so tired, and he started coming back, but he was so tired and it was so hot, he was barfing on the side of the court. He was throwing
Wow.
up. He was so tired and so sick, and yet he kept going. And he ended up winning this tournament. And I thought to myself, it was about 1 a.m. or so, as I recall, I just said, if Todd Martin could win that, maybe Julia could survive this. And, that's, to me, that's what sports do for me. They show resilience. We came back, and, I was determined to still keep our family together. I was determined to keep to not let this destroy me or destroy our family. But we came back and fully expecting that she would have been dead by then. And she seemed to be, and we hadn't seen her. And doctor said, you might want to take a look at Julia, just, if you want to say goodbye to her or just, see how she's doing. They pulled back the curtain, and she was actually kind of moving a little spastically. Her eyes were still fixed and wide open, but she was moving very spastically. And I didn't know what to make of that, so I asked one of the doctors, and the doctors kind of said, this is often what happens in the last throes of death. If your heart really is giving up or other things, that sort of movement happens. And I said, okay. And I just sat down next to her and whispered goodbyes. And I held her hand, and I thought I felt a little squeeze. And of course, doctors often say, parents do that. They feel the squeeze, whether it's there or not. And I then whispered in her ear, if you can hear me, Julia, squeeze my hand. And I felt a little squeeze. It was just very, very faint, though. And I then told the doctor, I think I felt a squeeze. And the doctor said, oh, okay. And I started doing some calculus in my own head, realizing that if she actually could come back, if they resuscitated her, but she was mentally severely impaired, and, she could just squeeze my hand after I asked her to squeeze it, but still be impaired, she would never get a new heart. She wouldn't be listed. And so I didn't want her suffering anymore. So I had to figure out some test. And the night before we were actually together, before I started watching the US Open, I was teaching her Roman numerals, which is something that she was learning in school. And we'd gone through the first set of Roman numerals. And so I whispered in her ear. And again, you're whispering into a child who has her eyes totally fixed and dilated and wide open and just staring. And she's just making, every once in a while, a tiny little jerk like that. Said, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand IV times in Roman numerals. And she squeezed my hand 4 times. And then I went, holy crap. I turned to the doctor and said, you listen to this. You hold her hand. And went through the same procedure. And he went pale. Wow. And suddenly there were like 8 people working on her. And they had already pulled out all of her tubes except for her breathing tube. They put all those tubes back in. And they started working on her like crazy. And she came back. No one knows why. It's the doctors there have treated hundreds, thousands of patients, never seen anything like it, and not even close. So I didn't know what even to make of it. And within a few days, she got a new heart. She was listed to become number 1. She was number 1 in the nation for a new heart after that. And she became a new heart transplant recipient. And then and she was still blind during that, partially blind. And that started coming back because the part of her brain that was not getting oxygen was part of, related to optic nerve. And so the bottom line is she ended up seeing again. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Within a week, we put an electric piano at her bed, and she could see, and she had been playing the piano, but she started playing better than she had ever played. And she is playing Bach on the piano, this beautiful piece. And the doctor, the head of cardiology, walked in, and he started crying. He had never seen anything like this, and said, "I don't know what to make of this. We think we've done everything that was within reason. And I don't know how else to say this other than it seems like a miracle to me."
When we look at people who endure enormous strain and stress, and I think of two categories. One is Holocaust survivors, obviously front and center in my mind. Second to that, equally, are past presidents of this country. Everything says to me that they shouldn't survive, right? These are people who, after that level of unimaginable stress like nobody else has, those Holocaust survivors, what they endured, and presidents, what they go through in the course of 4 or 8 years, and presumably life should be shortened by a lot. And it doesn't seem to be. How do you understand that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with presidents.
Okay.
And my favorite president is Jimmy Carter. Maybe not the best president, but the best after president, right?
Right.
Post-president, I think, of any that I can think of, because he started, so many movements and continued to volunteer building homes for, the rest of his life. He, imagine how trying it is to be a president. Well, you just brought it up. It is, no matter which president you are. And yet he continued to not just survive, but thrive. And I think it's because of this transcending purpose that he had. There are other presidents who say, "I can't wait to go back and start golfing again."
Right.
But, those people after a few days realize they stink at golf. And maybe golf is not going to keep them going. And in fact, sometimes the bigger you are, CEOs who I've worked with before who then retire, suddenly they're not needed anymore. Nobody relies on them anymore. They don't have a purpose. They've lost that purpose. They have to repurpose their lives. And they're not going to repurpose their life through golf or through drinking Mai Tais on the beach in Hawaii. Those are wonderful things, and they may build up more energy to become purposeful. But if you don't have this deeper transcending purpose in your life at retirement, you're going to have a hard time. You could say the same thing. We have studied soldiers that have come back from the Gulf War, and some of them suffer PTSD, but others end up with post-traumatic growth. And in studying, what's the difference? What's the distinction? And this isn't even my research. This is research done by other groups who carefully study soldiers coming back, found the number one predictor was purpose. Can I repurpose my life after this? If I can't, then I'm going to suffer. But if I can, and I can find purpose and meaning from this, some connection to something bigger than myself, that's what we might call meaning in our life, where we feel like our life has some reason there. There's something that's important for me. The reason I'm here is important. Those people end up doing well. And you could say that Holocaust survivors who come out and have that sense of purpose and meaning are much more likely to not just survive, but thrive.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Lee Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Lee Paz. Digital marketing by Notebook Media. The Meaning Mindset is hosted by Rabbi Ron Lee Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.